It's a trilogy, kind of like Lord of the Rings, and this character, Wilson Turner, he's my Bilbo. He goes there and back again. A lot of things happen to him. So that's all historical fiction. Today, the topic is history, and it's all going to be completely factual, as far as I know, and as far as we can achieve. It's about Waxhaw during the Civil War. And I've entitled this little talk, Waxhaw Civil War, from Wilson's Store to Gettysburg and back. Because in a funny way, as you'll see towards the end, this area, Wilson's Store. Anybody heard of Wilson's Store before? Some of you are local people that you know about it. It was like a general store over by where Walkersville Presbyterian Church is now, but it's been torn down years ago. That's for the Waxhaw people where the war kind of started, and it's also where it ended with the only battle that was fought in Union County during the war. So how did all that happen? Well, let's see. Go to the next slide, if you would, please. Anybody recognize this painting? What is this place? What's going on?
Fort Sumter.
That's Fort Sumter, exactly. April 12th, 1861, the bombardment of Fort Sumter. This is where the real war actually started. Funny thing, though, as far as it relates to North Carolina was not part of the Confederacy at this time. April 12th, 1861, we were still part of the Union. North Carolina is one of those reluctant states, like Virginia and Tennessee and Arkansas, that kind of waited till the war started before deciding, which side they were gonna be on. And in fact, North Carolina had a referendum on the 28th of February, 1861. The legislature sent it out as a vote to the people. Says, do you want to secede, go with South Carolina and those other people that seceded when Lincoln was elected? Or do you want to kind of, the phrase they used in those days, watch and wait? Well, the people voted, let's not secede. Let's not call a convention. Let's watch and wait. That was in 28 February. Well, 6 weeks later, boom, boom, boom. South Carolina is shooting at Fort Sumter, which causes this to happen. Next slide, please. You recognize this man, of course. You can't shoot at my fort. If you do that, I'm gonna raise some troops, and we're gonna have a little fight about it. The president puts out a proclamation, asks for 75,000 volunteers. Let's put down the rebellion, or the insurrection, as it was often called in those days by the newspapers and such. Well, how did North Carolina respond to this? Next slide, please. Next slide. There you go. Well, when our governor got that telegram about asking for troops from Lincoln, and he responded thusly: "I can be no part of this here wicked violation of the law." I imagine he said that. I don't know, but he probably dictated it because it was by telegram, so you couldn't get the accent at all. But it's more funny if I say it that way. The laws of this country and to this war upon the liberties of a free people, you can get no troops from North Carolina. And he didn't, not for a long time anyway. So North Carolina's citizens went back to the polls, had a real quick vote, and we were actually the last state to secede from the Union and join the Confederacy. So by that time, Virginia and Tennessee and South Carolina were seceded, so we were kind of in it whether we wanted to be or not. Next slide, please. Well, if you're going to go to war in those days, what do you have to do? Well, the first thing is you've got to raise an army, right? You can't fight a war without an army. And what was the army? Well, the army is, in those days, were the militia called into service and then sent to a training camp somewhere. Union County, pretty much immediately, well, within that first year, 1861, raised 4 different companies of infantry to go fight. The first to get organized was what was called the Monroe Light Infantry. They met at a place called High Hill, which is just north of where Monroe is today, just north of Highway 74. If you go out Seeker Shortcut Road, you come across the High Hill area. But down here in this corner of the county, people were getting together around Wilson's Store. That was sort of the meeting place, the main meeting place for people. Whenever some civic activity was going on, they always met at Wilson's Store for the people of the Waxhaws did. And they formed a company, a little over 100 men, called the Waxhaw Jackson Guards. 2 other companies were raised in the county. Up around Rocky River, you had the Red Wine Beauregards, and around the Wingate area, the North Carolina Defenders. Now, why do you suppose these guys would call themselves the Red Wine? I mean, this is pretty obvious, the others, what they are, but why pick a name like that?
Sure one.
It predated Cheryl. It actually was raised by a man named Redwine. That part's kind of easy.
Brandywine.
Yeah. But why would they call themselves, these young men would call themselves the Beauregards? I mean, it sounds really southern.
They were gentlemen and they drank.
They were gentlemen. And there was a guy, Beauregard, who at this time, in the summer of 1861, was probably the most famous man in the South at that moment. It was General Beauregard, General P.T.G. Beauregard. He had commanded the troops at Sumter, that fired on Sumter, and he was the commanding general of the Southern forces in the Battle of Bull Run, the first big battle that was a resounding Southern victory. And so, he was like the man of the hour, at the time. So they were all going to march off to war and be Beauregards. Now you'll notice these company designations and regimental designations, these were assigned later once these units were formed, shipped off to Raleigh, and accepted into Confederate service.
How many men were in a company then?
In a typical company, there would be about 100 men. The Monroe Light Infantry, when they marched off, I know that they had 110. I know that because it was from I saw it in a diary entry. The others would have been something very similar. The ones we're going to talk about here today are these guys, the Waxhaw Jackson Guards, because they're Waxhaw, right? They organized at Wilson Store, and they wound up back at Wilson Store. So Waxhaw Jackson Guards, they got organized in June 5th, I think was the day they started enlisting men, and they nearly filled up their roster right away on that. So now they're getting together in their camp, they're getting organized, and they want to go off for training. But before they leave, next slide please. Oh, by the way, this may be Wilson's store. A lot of people, that's like the picture that usually pops up when you go looking for Wilson's store. It might have been the Wilson home, but I don't know for sure because things have been torn down. But anyway, before they left, they had a little ceremony, and this was very typical for almost all the companies that were raised in the South during this time, and in the North too, I imagine. The ladies of the area would get together and sew a flag. They'd design a flag for their particular unit of men, and they'd sew it out of silk or whatever they had, and they wouldn't just send it by UPS or something. They would have a ceremony where the company would gather together in formation, and the public would come and watch, and politicians would stand up and make speeches. And one lady, a lady of high social standing, would be chosen to do the actual presentation. She'd have a very patriotic speech all made up to do that. The lady who did this was a lady named Anna Curington, and we're lucky that we actually have the full, complete text of her speech, because there was a reporter from a newspaper in Charlotte at the time, the Western Democrat, who had gone to this and watched it and wrote a nice little story. That's what this is over here. It goes on and on, detailing what all happened in this ceremony. The reporter was very impressed by it. I'm not going to read the whole speech to you because she went on and on. But I do want to give you a line or two from it to kind of give you an idea of the tenor of the speech and the sort of thinking that went into what they were doing. She starts off after some brief introductions in what she says. 86 years ago, the citizens of Mecklenburg County, of which Union was then a part, smarting under the insults and wrongs of British oppression, solemnly declared their connection with the British Crown forever dissolved. Okay, now, if this is the start of the thing, she's getting people to think, this is what we did before. We stood up for our rights. We broke away from what we saw as a tyrannical government, as is explained in the Declaration of Independence. And now it's our generation, so we got to do it again because there was no good mix in Washington or being oppressive. And why were they being oppressive? Well, because they'd elected a Republican legislature and Republican president, and they were very much anti-slavery, and so that institution was under threat. And so really, what starts the whole thing. But what they're thinking down here and throughout a lot of the South is that this is like a second American Revolution. And that's why we have to break away from this tyrannical government and stuff. And it goes on and on, pretty much in that same vein, listing the various outrages and stuff. Interestingly, when she's done with her speech, she hands the flag over to a Lieutenant Wilson, Lieutenant William Wilson, who shows up later in our story at Gettysburg in another capacity. So he hands it to him, he makes a nice little speech in return. The reporter goes on to say all kinds of interesting things here about the speeches that were made, the prayers that were offered, praises the band, there was a band playing, and he points out that there was a picnic afterwards. He says there were 1,000 to 1,200 people who came to this picnic. All the prominent families put food and drink and whatnot on the table. No alcohol though. He's very important. He's very clever to, or certain to point out at the end. Says the audience continued to fill up and stow away stores of good things until 1,000 or 1,200 partook of our bountiful picnic, and not a note of discord or a frown of displeasure, nor even the fumes of Bacchus were present to mar the pleasures of the day. Bacchus, the Roman god of wine. You know? He's making a point that just nobody got drunk. So, so we knew what we were doing when we did this. We didn't. It wasn't a drunken mistake. So it was a beautiful article. You can see it online actually. If you Google the Western Democrat newspaper, Google will try to send you some other place. But if you keep looking down, you'll find it online. And I just love reading these articles in that
What
paper.
was her name?
Anna Currington,
Okay.
it's like cure and then ton, Currington. Anybody about the last name of Currington in the? How about Steele? How about Wilson? These are some names that pop up in it. The commander of this local unit was John Steele, and he pops up early, but then he resigns a little bit later on. I don't think he was in really good health. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Now, when I say that they made a flag, maybe the first thing that comes to mind is, what we think of today is the Confederate flag, the star-crossed banner or the starry banner, the X with the, that flag didn't exist in those days, not yet. This is still the summer of 1861. Nobody's come up with that, or if they have, it hasn't become popularized throughout the South. So what these militia companies did, and what the ladies who sewed for them did, they were free to design their own. Some of the companies that were raised, like this one here, Company I, the 1st Regiment, which is from another place in North Carolina, they patterned their company flag after the Confederate national flag, the first Confederate national flag. A field of blue with a red and a white and a red stripe, and then there'd be like a circle of white stars. But instead of that, they put some other stuff up there. Their local militia had been organized back in 1859, I think, and so they put that in there. They put some symbol of, maybe like a horn of plenty and some Greek goddesses or something. They could put anything they wanted. I would give a lot, not anything, but a lot, to know what the flag that the ladies designed for the Waxhaw Jackson Guards looked like, but we don't know. I looked all over trying to find some hint of it. In that article in the paper, for all of its wonderful detail about the ceremony, it didn't say a word about the flag and what it looked like. So that was very frustrating. But yeah, they could design their own flags, and this was a popular pattern. Like the national flag, but with something local there. Next slide. Another popular pattern was to use the North Carolina state flag. Interestingly, North Carolina had never had a state flag until it seceded. The secession convention stayed in business for a long time after that and started making up new laws and whatnot, sort of in competition with the legislature. And one of the things that they did, one of the first things they did is said, well, now that we're seceded, we should have a state flag. And so they designed one. And it was a field of red with a big blue and a white stripe here with a big white star in the middle. And these two dates, May 20th, 1775 and May 20th, 1861. Now this was the date of the secession, May 20th, that's the date that the convention voted to secede. But what about the May 20th, 1775? Anybody know what date that was?
The Declaration.
The Declaration of what? The MECDEC, yes. The Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence. Yeah.
No, I'm not from here, but I.
You kind of figured that out, I
He's
think.
South Carolina.
Good.
We
See the
still
kind
love
of resonance between the two May 20ths there? Now, if you look on the North Carolina flag today, you'll notice they changed the colors around. This is blue and that's red, and they've taken, this date is still there, but they've taken the other one, they've replaced this with, what is it, April 16th of 1770, the date of the...
April 12th.
April 12th?
Yeah, Halifax resolves.
I thought that was a 16. Okay, but yeah, it was the Halifax Resolves. It was,
Yeah,
it was
Halifax Resolves,
another act of colonial rebellion that they wanted to do. But this is an example. Oh, it cuts it off there. It's another company somewhere designed a flag. One of the companies of the 1st North Carolina Regiment, obviously, and they just wrote some stuff on there. So they could do anything they wanted, flag-wise. You know, as long as their guys recognized it, that's all that was needed. Next slide, please. Now, before they could go off to their training camp in Raleigh, our guys, the Waxhaw Jackson Guards, they had to march to the railhead in Charlotte to get on the train that would take them over to Raleigh, where there was a training camp being established, where they would learn how to be Confederate soldiers and get their gear and all that stuff. On the way there, a writer from the Western Democrat, we don't know, maybe it's the same guy, I don't know, because they didn't sign the things in those days. He noted their passing through, said they were a fine company. There's Captain Steele, who's their commander. Fine-looking, healthy men, thoroughly equipped, except with guns. I can't give them guns until they learn how to use them, right? Praising Union County for seeing such fine-looking, healthy men, I guess, going off to war. But it's the second company from Union. Apparently, had seen one before, and that would have had to have been the Monroe Light Infantry. That was the one that was organized first. And I guess they beat them to the railhead and were seen first. Although they didn't get an article written up in the paper about them. But they wouldn't have known because they were in Raleigh by the time the paper came out. All right, thank you. Next one. Now, they finally get off the train in Raleigh. They're at Camp Carolina, a camp that was established on the grounds of this old and famous plantation that goes way back to colonial times. A plantation called Crabtree. If you've ever been to Raleigh and you decided to do a little shopping, you'll notice there's Crabtree Valley Mall, kind of northwest of the middle of town. That's the general area, that side of town anyway, a little further out really, where this camp was set up. At that camp, they would have met this first character here. At the time, he would have been a major, Major Henry K. Burgwin. Now, he's an interesting character, plays an essential role in what happens to our Waxhaw guys in the war. Brilliant man, apparently. Went to the University of North Carolina at 15 and graduated at 17. Went to the VMI, 16 and 18, and then went to the VMI, the Virginia Military Institute, for some more education, became part of the Corps Cadets there. And in fact, he was only 19 years old when all of this happened, when he was called back to North Carolina and said, come here and help us organize our troops. So here he is, 19 years old, not quite 20, and he's in charge of this training camp, and all these different companies are coming in, militia companies from around the state. He's assigning them where to go, setting up a training schedule, watching the drills and making corrections and making sure the officers know what they're doing and all that business. He knew his stuff. I mean, he was very good and very intelligent, but he was also very demanding, very strict. He insisted that the guys do it right. So he wasn't a very popular guy among the men. Now, you know that the way that the leadership of these units were chosen in those days was through election. The men got to vote for their company officers, their company commanders and their lieutenants and whatnot, and then the officers at that level would vote for who would be the officers over them. So he wanted to be the commander of a regiment. He wound up being the second in command of the 26th Regiment. And our guys, the Waxhaw Jackson Guards, were chosen to be in that regiment and were given the designation as Company B. So the Waxhaw Jackson Guards, once they got there and were accepted into Confederate service, were thereafter officially known as Company B, 26th North Carolina Infantry. But we'll still call them the Waxhaw Jackson Guards from time to time when we feel like it. Now, the commander of that regiment, was voted on by the officers, was this fella here, Zebulon Vance. He was not a professional soldier at all. He was a politician. He had been in the legislature and had been making speeches and stuff. In fact, there's an interesting story about him because he was a Union man before the war. He had actually gone around the state making speeches, urging people, don't get excited. If South Carolina seceded, don't get excited, don't follow them. We should stay in the Union. We should watch and wait. And the story is that he was actually on the stump addressing the crowd, making the speech, and was gesticulating skyward. When the news came, somebody came running up and said, oh, they've fired on Fort Sumter, they're going to war. And the way he puts it in his memoirs is, my hand fell sadly beside that of a secessionist. So he was giving a Union argument until he heard that news, and he knew right away that things had changed. There's going to be a war. We got to pick a side. We can't fight against our own state. I have to go with the other side. Didn't like it, but that's the way you go. So he was a very popular character. He was a good politician, real backslapper, glad-handers kind of guy. And he was elected colonel. All right, so now we're trained up. We got our officers. Soon they got their weapons finally, and they're ready to go to war, right? Next slide. Hold up a little bit. I forgot about this one. Life in camp. We'll talk about that just a little bit more. From July to August, they're in Camp Carolina. They're training, and I found all sorts of interesting things that happened during their training. There's a fella in another company from Caldwell County, but was part of their regiment. He wrote this most interesting letter, a little piece of it here. I don't know if you can read that, but he writes, "I have been in and at many places, but this is the godliest place that I ever seen. Some sings, some gets drunk, some curses, some plays cards, and all sorts of devilment that white men could think of." Now, yeah, and I say it like that because it's kind of written like that, right? And this was a common problem too. A lot of the men who went off to did this in Camp Carolina, they were young. If you look at the roster from Company B, most of them were like 19, 20 years old. The vast majority of them, I'm sure, had never left home before. They'd never been out from under the watchful eyes of family members and relations and friends that they'd grown up around, and the local preacher and people from the church and whatnot. So this was an interesting situation, and it still is today. You know, when I was in the military down at one of my last duty stations was at the infantry training school at Fort Benning, and we would get these new recruits in and start them through infantry basic training, and we had these same kind of problems crop up. The first time in their lives, they're sort of free of the influences that have made them live a certain way, and plus they got a little money in their pockets, so they get in all sorts of trouble. And this guy's writing about the trouble others were getting into. Unfortunately, sometimes that trouble led to tragic incidents. Again, from the Charlotte paper, we learned of this, what they called a serious affray. Now, this one is not so long, and I think I will read it. In fact, I will kind of dramatize it for you a little bit if I could, because I just love the way this is written. This is something that actually happened to one of our Waxhaw boys. The paper states, "We are pained to learn that a serious affray occurred on Sunday night, the 4th instant, in the southern portion of Raleigh, at the house of a Mrs. Crawley. Between 11 and 12 o'clock at night, a soldier named W.P. Baker of the Waxhaw Jackson Guards," are there any Bakers in here? Good. This is not nice. "Now encamped 2 miles from the city, went to the house of Mrs. Crawley, knocked, and demanded admittance. Mrs. Horton, whose husband is a soldier in Virginia, is living with Mrs. Crawley, her mother. The females were immediately aroused and peremptorily refused Baker admittance. He urged his demand and threatened to enter forcibly if the door was not opened. Becoming much alarmed, Mrs. Horton quietly slipped out at the back door, and going to the house of a Mr. George Davis nearby, informed him of the attack made upon them and begged his assistance. Mr. Davis had married a daughter of Mrs. Crowley. He immediately arose and dressed himself, and fearing he might have some difficulty, took his gun with him. On reaching the house of Mrs. Crawley, he found Baker, a stranger to him, evidently intoxicated and still demanding admittance and making his threats. Davis at once remonstrated with Baker and begged him to leave, which Baker refused to do. Davis continued his remonstrances until both became excited. Baker drew his bowie knife and threatened to stab Davis, and, suiting the action to the word, he advanced upon Davis, still threatening, though Davis raised his gun and shot him, Baker being near enough to be burnt by the gun. The load entered his breast, making an aperture as large as $0.25. He was alive when we last heard, but no hopes are entertained of his recovery. Davis went immediately after the doctor." There's a little bit about the legal ramifications afterwards, but that's the story of how one of our, well, at least a guy who was part of the Waxhaw Jackson Guards wound up. I got curious about this, and I wanted to look up on the roster of the men who had signed up with the Waxhaw Jackson Guards to see who was this guy Baker. And I was surprised to find that of all the men listed here, Baker, where are you? Here you go. William T. Baker, residence unknown. Apparently he was not a local man. So how did he wind up in the Waxhaw Jackson Guards? He signed up on the very first day the books were opened, the 5th of June. Turns out, though, his age is listed as 38. He was the 3rd oldest man in the unit. And I'm thinking, now why would a 38-year-old man from someplace else who apparently has an alcohol problem sign up with the Waxhaw Jackson Guards and get himself shot in Raleigh? Well, must have been maybe a drifter, somebody running from the law. Could have been. I don't know. I don't know anything else about him but that. But I did find it was kind of an interesting thing. It didn't reflect well on the unit, but it's something that did happen. Next slide, please. All right. So now it's the 2nd of September, and things are happening on the North Carolina coast. The Federal Navy shows up off of Cape Hatteras. Everybody knows what Cape Hatteras is, right? Mm-hmm. It shows up off Cape Hatteras, and they seize the 2 little forts guarding the inlet to the sounds. You know, we have the ocean, and then there's the little lines of the islands, the Outer Banks people call it, and then the sounds. And you got to get past those islands. And there's only a couple of places you can go. And that inlet there at Hatteras is one of them. So once the Federal Navy has control of that inlet, they can send their gunboats into the sounds of North Carolina. And from there, they can start going up the rivers and threatening all these little coastal towns like Edenton and Bath and New Bern especially. New Bern was the big town on the inner banks. And that's where they were heading eventually. So here it is now. September has rolled around and the state's getting worried. They're saying, you know what, we need to send more units down to the coast to guard New Bern in particular. And the 26th was chosen as one of those units to go bolster the defenses down there. Now, sure enough, coming up the Neuse River, from Pamlico Sound to the Neuse River, coming up the river, the Federals landed a force, kind of an amphibious operation on the 12th of March. Started moving in. It was raining. It was a miserable march. But they came up to the line of that the Confederates were defending. See these little black lines right here? These are where the various regiments of the Confederate defending force were stationed. And the Federal forces were coming up from this direction here. This is the river on the side. New Bern, the town, it's off the screen over here. There's a road leading straight up to it, and a railroad, and a bridge over another river, the Trent, to get into town. So the Confederates are trying to hold them off down here, south of town, away from town. And at first, everything was going well. The units on this side had a big field in front of them. Every time the Federals began to move across it, boom, 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 they'd fall back. They weren't making any progress at all. On this side of the road, they had this one regiment and parts of others. That's the 26th. We were on the right flank. The Waxhaw Jackson Guards were. In front of them was a swamp. Federals didn't want to go through the swamp. They sent a few units through. They got close to the 26 lines. Our guys shot at them. Boom, boom, boom. They fell back. And at this point, there's Colonel Vance and Lieutenant Colonel Burgoyne and the Waxhaw Jackson Guards and the other companies in the regiment. They're thinking, hey, this is pretty easy. You know, we got slightly raised ground overlooking a swamp. They come slogging through. We shoot at them. They run away. We're doing great. And the word came, retreat. What? Vance is confused. What do you mean retreat? We're winning. No, we're not. These guys over here, there's see this little gap in the line? Yankees are coming through. They're going up the road. They're going to capture New Bern. These guys are all retreating in disorder. So Vance is thinking, wait a minute, I can't go up that way. I'll run into the Yankees. I'll go this way, west, into the woods, into the swampy woods. I'll get around them and go away that way. And he did. He leads the regiment away from the battle in that direction. And it's a good thing he did too, because they set the bridge on fire too early and trapped about 500 or 600 of the Confederate soldiers on the wrong side of the bridge, and they were all captured. You know? So he kind of moves off to the west through the woods, hoping the Yankees didn't notice him going. And it turns out they didn't, because when they ran into this other stream, Bryce's Creek, which was unfordable, they were trapped there for several hours while they looked for little boats or something to help them ferry them in across. Now the regiment at this point was around 800 soldiers. They found a couple of boats, maybe 3, and were able to ferry about 14 guys at a time across, back and forth. It wasn't a really big stream, but it was unfordable. Zebulon Vance found that out the hard way when he first got to it. You know, he's on his horse. He tried to ride his horse into the river because horses can swim, and sometimes you can swim your horse across. That horse wasn't having no, get off of me, heavy man, and he kicked him off. Vance nearly drowned because, like most people in those days, he didn't know how to swim. Plus, he's wearing the, you saw his uniform and his sword and pistol and his accoutrements, and he's sinking. He would have drowned if a couple of his own men who did know how to swim hadn't jumped in and pulled him out to safety to the other side. So he had a close call there. But anyway, bit by bit, with Vance on one side and Burgoyne on the other, supervising the loading of the troops, he got the entire regiment across. So the 26th came out of the battle. You know, it was a Confederate defeat, but the 26th came out of it having done well. And Vance himself, it enhanced his reputation as well as that of the regiment when they were able to link up with the rest of the troops in Kinston later on. Next slide, please. Ooh. So they've had their first little taste of battle. Not much, but something. The spring rolls into summer. Up in Virginia, the Federal Army under General McClellan, who you probably heard about, George McClellan, Little Napoleon, they called him. He's advancing towards Richmond, and he gets really, really close, coming up the James Peninsula. He's very, very close there. And Robert E. Lee has taken over the Army of Northern Virginia at this point, you know, in June before this. And he's thinking, he's getting too close. I need to push them back somehow. So he pulls some troops down from the mountains. Stonewall Jackson's guys. He says, "You guys get on the train and come down quickly." He looks around and says, "Who else I got? I'll pull some troops out from further south, the 26th in North Carolina. Put them on the train, run them up to Richmond, add them to my army." So he's gathering forces, and then towards the end of June, he says, we're gonna throw this knockout punch and try to crush the Army of the Potomac before they know what's going on. And they do. He launches what becomes known as the 7 Days Campaign, or the Battle of the 7 Days. For the first 6 days, he's throwing units at them, throwing punches left and right, and McClellan is kind of shocked and confused. He believes that, where all these rebels come from? Like he thinks that Lee's army is much bigger than it is, so he's retreating, he's losing battle after battle. The 26th takes part in some of those battles, but it's not until the last day, day 7, which happens to be July 1st, 1862, that the 26th is thrown into it full force and gets its first big taste of a very big and bloody battle. And that was at the place called Malvern Hill. The Federal Army of the Potomac had retreated all the way back to like the edge of the James River, and in that painting you can kind of see boats in the background. Their gunboats up there giving them covering fire. They've retreated to the top of this very slight rise, with big fields in front of them. They've lined up cannon almost hub to hub. Is the description you always hear about that. About 200 of them. And the Confederates are attacking in a kind of uncoordinated, piecemeal fashion, which was incredibly frustrating to Lee because he couldn't get his commanders to understand. He wanted them to mass and come all at once. The 26th gets thrown into the battle, but not until the very end. I mean, it is late in the day. It is dusk as the 26th is moving up to its assigned place. And in fact, it wouldn't have found it except that Burgoyne, who was in command now, Vance having gone back to North Carolina to run for governor, he'd had enough of battle, I guess, once he got his suit dried out. Burgoyne's in charge. He's leading the unit up, and it's getting dark. He can't find the right place. He sees retreating Confederate troops who'd gone before and had enough of battle, and now they were trying to run away. He holds one of them at sword point, demanding, "Show me the way up to the front line." And of course, the guy does because he doesn't want to get stuck. So the 26th gets in line. The Waxhaw guys are right there with them. The order is given. They start moving forward. It's so dark by the time they get going, because it's around 9 o'clock, you know, and even though it's summertime, around 9 o'clock it's starting to get really dark, and there's a lot of smoke in the air from the battle. As they're going forward, the only way they can keep oriented is seeing the flash of the Federal guns, the people that are shooting at them up there. As they're going up the hill, they're stumbling over dead men and wounded guys who are laying there going, "Help, help, give me water," or something like that. They get about within, and accounts here vary. It was dark; they didn't really know. They think they were within about 100 yards of where the Federal lines were, when they heard voices, Southern voices crying out, "Don't shoot, don't shoot, there's units in front of you." And so Burgoyne is like, well, I can't tell, I can't see. He orders everybody to lay down. So the 26th, Company B, they're all lying flat. A lot of shooting going on for another hour or so. And then around 10 o'clock, the Yankees start, they stop shooting. They can't see what they're shooting at anyway. Then the order comes, retreat, pull back. So they whisper the order around, they get up and they start moving back. Turns out they didn't get many casualties in that battle either, although most of the other units that participated in this particular attack on Malvern Hill, they just got chewed to pieces. They were, it was like at least 2-to-1 ratio of Confederate casualties to Union battle. Very bloody battle. Not many 26th infantry guys hit, but they saw a lot of their comrades dead and hit around them. The next day when the sun came up, the Federals were already gone. Sometime after midnight, they began to pack up and leave, went down to the James River, got on the gunboats and sailed away. So they kind of escaped. It was very frustrating to Robert E. Lee at the time, because he thought he had a chance of knocking them out, destroying an army. Couldn't quite get it done. Next slide, please. For the rest of 1862 and into 1863, the 26th kept getting shuffled back and forth between Virginia and eastern North Carolina. Whenever the Federals got active on the coast and began to threaten these little coastal towns like Washington or Plymouth or whatnot, they would, well, they already had New Bern, of course. They would shuffle down there to try to fight them. They besieged Washington for a while, but that came to nothing. In March of that year, they joined some other Confederate forces that tried to retake New Bern. That was a disaster. It did not come off well at all. But then something would happen in Virginia. They'd have to go back up there. Next slide, please. During this time, they've been in our service now for a little over a year, began to have problems of things like desertion. All that hoorah that they started off with was beginning to wear off. Plus, they were getting these letters from back home. Oh, we're out of corn, and the baby's sick, and the cows and the turnips again, and so please come home and whatnot. So a lot of guys were slipping away, taking French leave, as they call it in those days. And the solution to that was, well, we're going to have to shoot some of you guys for desertion. Unfortunately, a B Company guy, a Private Wyatt, was caught deserting in December of 62. So in January of 63, after a court-martial, he was condemned to be shot. Now, the way that was done in those days is the whole brigade would come out to watch, because part of the purpose of holding these executions was to teach a lesson to the men. Says this can happen to you if you desert or do something wrong. So they're all lined up here, standing in formation to watch. A firing squad of 10 men selected from his own company, that would be B Company men, selected to do this. And here's poor old Private Wyatt sitting on his coffin waiting for the bullets to come. And at the last minute, an officer steps up and reads a reprieve. You're not going to shoot you this time. So it was a demonstration. And it must have worked, because the records showed that desertions dropped off dramatically for a month or two after that. Okay, next slide. But of course, the war kept going, and eventually they were called on back to Virginia again. We all know about the Battle of Gettysburg, Lee's invasion of the North. The 26th actually played a very prominent role on the first day of the battle, as the first Confederate units were moving in down the road towards Gettysburg, ran into some Union opposition at a place called McPherson's Field, or McPherson's Ridge, actually. It was a very wide open sort of area. Turns out that the unit that was directly opposite from the 26th was the famous and very renowned Iron Brigade. Everybody heard of the Iron Brigade before? These were the Union units. They were distinguishable on the battlefield by these black hats that they wore, cocked on one side with a feather or something in there. And it was a tough unit. And they had to be, because they were standing on top of the ridge as the 26th was advancing at them, firing back and forth, volley after volley. Both sides took horrendous casualties, absolutely horrendous. I'll show you some figures in a minute here to amplify that. But the bottom line was the 26th actually did drive them off. Unfortunately, Colonel Burgoyne, the boy colonel, a very young colonel, he was shot in this. He was shot in the breast and died. And it was a B Company man who actually picked him up. Him and a friend wrapped him in a blanket and took him off the field. That young man's name was Neville Staton. Are there any Statons in the room? It's an old Union County name. Okay. So Neville Staten, he takes them off, and he shows up later in our show as well. So this part of the battle was a victory, especially for the 26th. They won. They pushed the Iron Brigade off McPherson's Ridge, and won great acclaim for it. But there weren't that many of them around afterwards to enjoy it. Now, for their good performance on day one of Gettysburg, which was a 3-day battle, they had very little to do. They sat in the rear, they recuperated, they gathered up their wounded, see who could still fight, that sort of thing. On day 3, when it came time for Pickett's charge, everybody's heard of that, right? Their unit, their whole brigade actually, Pettigrew's brigade, was selected to be front and center of the North Carolina portion. There was like 2 columns converging on Cemetery Ridge. The North Carolinians were the ones led by North Carolina, and Virginians on the other side, mostly Virginians, under Pickett. And they wound up front and center. And they must have asked themselves as they took their positions after what we did 2 days ago, why are we the front guys here? Because they're the ones that are going to get shot the most. Nevertheless, they went forward. They did their duty. Some of their men made it to the wall. You hear about this wall at Gettysburg, low stone wall. Some of them made it that far. There's this story, perhaps apocryphal, that their colors bearer and another man got all the way up to the wall, and the Yankees stopped shooting at them because they were impressed with their bravery, and told them, come over this side of the Lord, step over the wall and just surrender, and we'll take you prisoner. Well, their flag was captured, and these 2 men were captured also. So that may be true, maybe not. It was the 12th New Jersey, by the way, that they ran into there. The North Carolinians, since then, it's part of this motto of the 26th that came out after the war. They were first at Bethel, which was the battle that actually happened before Manassas, furthest at Gettysburg, and last at Appomattox, the last to lay down there. Well, that was true or not, we take liberties and things like that. Next slide, please. Tell me about the aftermath of the battle. Well, we've all seen the pictures. Day 1, McPherson's Ridge, they went into the battle with 843 men. 86 were killed during the shooting, during the battle. 430 were wounded. Many of those died later from wounds, so the actual toll of death from that battle was much higher. 72 were captured. The entire company was cut off and captured in that attack. That's 70% casualty rate for one attack. This occurred over a space of about 30 minutes of fighting. Okay? And of course, they lost their commander, Colonel Bergman. On day 3 in Pickett's charge, they were able to scrape together about 230 men, the unhurt men from the day before, plus some of the walking wounded. We had a couple of days to recover. 70 of them came back unhurt. Unknown number wounded. They were able to drag back. By the time they made it back to Virginia, there were only 120 men reporting for duty, some of them wounded. So that's an 85% loss rate for that campaign, for the whole Gettysburg campaign. Captain Steele, I told you about, who had raised the unit, he had resigned earlier for health reasons. So this this William Wilson, the man who had accepted the flag from Anna Currington, he was in command at this time. He was killed going up the hill at Cemetery Ridge, and another lieutenant named Currington took over from that point on. So he was killed. Next slide, please. They weren't out of the woods yet, though. The battle was over, but the trouble wasn't. On the retreat from Gettysburg, it rained torrentially. Their column was loaded with wounded men in wooden wagons that had no springs. The roads were in terrible shape, rocky and rutted and muddy. They lost more men on the way back, who just died of wounds in the back of wagons. When they got down to the Potomac River here, Potomac, people keep reminding me, they couldn't get across it because it was all those rains had swollen the river, and the Yankees the cavalry had come and taken out the pontoon bridges that they'd put in earlier, so they were trapped. And if Meade, the General Meade of the Union forces, had been able to concentrate his forces, get them down there quick enough, and give Lee that big smack, he could have ended the war right there, most people think. So it was kind of the reverse of what happened in Virginia there in the 7 Days campaign. You had the enemy trapped against the river and a chance to knock them out, but just couldn't manage the strength to do it. The Confederates were able to escape. The Pettigrew's Brigade, the 26th, were part of the rear guard that made sure of that. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. There you go. So on the 14th of July, they were the last unit to go across under the command of this General James Pettigrew. Unfortunately, it cost Pettigrew his life. And the story there is that he's standing there with the 26th and a few of the other regiments that he's got. His division commander, General Heath, comes down to see him and see what's going on. About that time, a squadron of Federal cavalry appears over a rise, about a quarter of a mile away. Pettigrew sees it and he tells his men, "Hey, get your weapons. Make sure you're loaded. I think those are enemy." Heath overrules him, says, "Those are our guys. They just captured a U.S. flag." But look, they're drawing their sabers. They're charging. It was too late. Here they come. Well, it's only a squadron, which is, at that point, probably about 100 men, maybe 150. And you got what's left of an entire brigade. So you've got several hundred Confederates lounging around here. Most of them didn't have time to load their guns, but they used them as clubs. And it turned into this almost hand-to-hand melee with horses somehow involved. Pettigrew, in the middle of this melee, tried to pull a pistol out. He had wounded arm, so he could only use one hand. He pulls a pistol and he shoots at a Federal trooper, but his gun misfires. The trooper sees that, swings his carbine around, bang, shoots Pettigrew in the gut, knocks him down. Remember Private Neville Staten that I mentioned earlier, who had pulled Burgoyne's body or wounded? Got him safe to safety. He saw this, and apparently he really liked his officers, and he took offense. He grabbed this guy, pulled him off of his horse, and literally killed him with a large rock. Crushed his chest with a large rock, is what you see when you read these accounts of eyewitnesses and whatnot. So good old Staten steps up there. He became a sergeant by the time this was over. The last man to stand in on the pontoon bridge as the last Confederate units went across the Potomac and made it back to safety in Virginia was this Captain Thomas Curitan, who a few days later had been Lieutenant Curitan with B Company, 26th North Carolina. He was, when Captain Wilson was killed at Cemetery Ridge, he was immediately promoted. He was the only officer left. So he was promoted to captain and he was in charge of what was left of the company. Next slide, please. And I'm sorry, I'm going along on this, but I'm trying to hurry up. Other battles, well, for the rest of the war, the 26th, it was able to recruit more members. Then, of course, there was conscription, so men had to come. And it got back some wounded guys, so it eventually rebuilt its numbers, but it was never again the largest regiment in the Army, which it had been at one time. They fought at the Wilderness, terrible battle up there. Spotsylvania came right afterwards. The race down to the North Anna, they were part of Lee's forces that did that. And all the way down to Cold Harbor, that terrible attack where the Union Army lost over 7,000 men in like 15 minutes of fighting. Just a terrible, brutal frontal attack that was, Grant really, in his memoirs, he said it's the only action that he really deeply regretted from the war, ordering that attack. But it was never again the unit that it was before. Next slide. And they were with Lee when they surrendered at Appomattox. Interesting note here, this Captain Curitan, he was in charge of the regiment that day because the guy who had risen to regimental command, a fellow named Jones, I believe, had suffered a wound and was not feeling well, so our Captain Curitan had to oversee the regiment's surrender. Footnote, he returned to Waxhaws, became a successful cotton merchant, was a prominent citizen down here for a while. And in 1890, he wrote down at the request of another officer, one of the generals at Gettysburg, a detailed account of what the 26th had done in that battle. And that's how we know a lot of the little fine details. It comes through him, from him through others into published accounts. Next slide. That brings us back to Wilson's store. How so? Well, a few weeks before Appomattox, there was in another theater of the war, down in Georgia, Sherman had gone through there. He'd started moving up through South Carolina. He'd captured Columbia. Somehow it got burned to the ground. And he's still coming further north. He's entering North Carolina from the south. He's really heading to Fayetteville, but he wants us to think that he's going to Charlotte. So he sends his cavalry under this guy here, Judson Kilpatrick, often known as Kill Cavalry for his impetuous and bad decisions on the battlefield that got his own men killed. He sends them on a screening mission toward Charlotte to make it look like Sherman's whole army is going that way. Well, the Confederate General Wheeler, who had a division of cavalry, his job was to engage with Sherman's units and find out where they were going for sure. He set up a line of defense around where Wilson's store is, basically. Made Wilson's store in their home his headquarters. Dismounted his men, dug them in along Cane Creek, the north side of Cane Creek. This is before there was a park there, and obviously, and a nice lake, paddle boats and things. And then a little further back where the little hill where the cemetery is, supposedly that's where his cannons were. Frankly, I think they were probably further to the left, must have had, because the ground's a little higher there. But somewhere around in there, that's where he had his cannons. It was a brief skirmish. It was brief because, well, the federal mission was not to attack them and run them out. The federal mission was to make them think they were heading to Charlotte. So they had a couple of charges, make them think, we're coming, we're coming. They were driven off. Very few casualties. The Union lost either 1 or 3 men, depending on which account you believe, and 5 wounded. I think the Confederates had a man or 2 wounded, nobody killed. And that would have been the end. That was like the last actual shooting that took place in Union County, the only real shooting in the Civil War, actually. And it was just a few weeks before Appomattox. It was the 1st of March. While this was happening, another interesting footnote, a detachment of Union cavalry, 30 or 40 men, nobody knows exactly for sure, had gone around the battle and had gone up the road and entered Monroe. Now there was nobody to defend Monroe in those days, but they just sort of waltzed into town, or their horses did, and they found there was a wagon train there, some people from South Carolina who were like refugees and trying to get away. They captured their goods, they captured a couple of Confederate couriers, took some other things that they liked, and were apparently in the process of trying to burn down our old wooden courthouse, not the nice brick one that we got now, the wooden courthouse, the original one, yeah. And when some of Wheeler's men showed up, I don't know if they knew they were there or not, but they showed up, and the Union troops skedaddled, thus saving our courthouse, and saving all those records from going back to, well, shoot, not colonial days, but from the very formation of the county. Boy, we'd be in a world of hurt, us historians, if we'd gotten away with burning that. So, that's from Wilson's store to Gettysburg and back again. Next slide, please. And I think it'd be the last slide. Yeah, he's done. And I said I would talk a little bit about this saga I've written. I'll talk about that offline if you want to. Oh, and I told my friend Curtis Crockett, who wrote this book called Leaving Gettysburg, that I would mention that as well. I've got copies of that out as well. He's also a writer like me who does historical fiction based on the Civil War. He wrote a marvelous little account of fictional characters, one of whom is a guy from Company B, 26 North Carolina. It literally begins with the repulse at Cemetery Ridge with him and his wounded buddy walking back, trying to get away from the Yankee fire. And it ends at Falling Waters, where they were trying to cross the Potomac, with that little incident where Pettigrew is killed. So it's an interesting little book, and I've got copies for sale up there. If you're interested in that, just come see me. And of course, there's my book. You can buy that as well. Well, that's my presentation. It went on longer than I hoped, but I'm leaving some time for questions. I think if anybody has any, I'll hang around and talk to you about anything. Yes, sir.
Okay, now I got a terrible memory.
Oh.
I'll say why.